For those of you who are new to Kenya, our winter has just ended. It was a very long, elongated winter this time. It took 5 months, May, June, July, August, September. Now we are in October. So those of you who are feeling a little hot in this room, just know we have just come from Nairobi winter, straight to our winter in the middle of the equator. But that's what we are going to be talking about today. Sustainability, the impact of climate change, and the world is going upside down. And then how do we manage tourism in those circumstances? So we are here today to discuss how the future will look like in light of the circumstances we find ourselves today. So, how many of you have ever watched The Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan? Small video, it's only 4 minutes. Carl Sagan, see one there, yes, two. The rest, no idea even who Carl Sagan is. Now that we are in the Nobel Prize week, I think today they announced the Nobel Prize for chemistry. Carl Sagan was an astronomer. I think if there was any prize for Nobel for astronomy, Carl Sagan would have taken it. So I want you to go and watch The Pale Blue Dot, and you can even watch it as this session is going on, because a lot of what we are going to be discussing are his thoughts about how the future will be handled. So welcome to the panel on sustainability. I'm Julius Kipng'etich. I used to be the director of KWS 10 years ago. Most of you visited national parks in Kenya, and I used to be the boss. And I disappeared. Now I am back, and today we are going to be discussing sustainability. And my panel today is a very rich panel, and it includes very senior people. So the first one is Giovanni Stark, the ambassador of Costa Rica. Karibu. Welcome to the stage. I was telling her that I used to know a very famous president of Costa Rica. In the 90s, he transformed Costa Rica. They used to produce bananas and coffee, more or less like us, because they're in the tropics. But he transitioned them to manufacture of semiconductors. And they increased their forest cover from 17% to 60%. So we long to hear that story. Sustainability at scale. The second one is Dr. David Chiawo, the Dean of Tourism and Hospitality at Strathmore University. Strathmore is not very far from now. Strathmore is our small Harvard University in Kenya. Yeah? And then we have Elizabeth Wathuti, the founder of Green Generation Initiative. Elizabeth. Elizabeth is an activist, and she tells me she's a small Greta, but not Greta is smaller. You know the girl from Norway, it's in Sweden. Yeah. And then, of course, Dr. Mohanjeet, one of you, Gamewatchers. I'm sure most of you know him. And then, of course, we have Julius Mbura. Julius, Karibu, Inable Africa. Okay? So take it slowly. Okay, so our panel is there, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to just make a few remarks before we start the Q&A. I think the world has gone through a great challenge in the last 200 years. I always trace it to a famous economist called Adam Smith. Those of you who have done economics will remember he wrote a small book called The Wealth of Nations, how capitalism should be. And capitalism has brought us this far. We have become richer than any other generation ever in this planet. We don't know much about way before that, but at least this cohort of human species have become richer. But that richness has come with its own consequences. We have exploited the earth probably much more than was necessary. Okay? We are still extracting, and if you read The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith says capitalism is endless. I think where we are today, it is clear that capitalism is not endless. We have seen the limits of exploitation, and so therefore, we are now talking about an existential threat to the planet. Is there any other planet we need to go to? The answer is no. So far, there is no other planet that harbors life. I know on Christmas Day last year, we sent a telescope. Most of you are familiar with James Webb, that replaces the Hubble telescope. Now it's still doing its experiments. It started sending pictures in July, and so far, there's no evidence that there's life elsewhere. So, our message today will be, this is the only place where we make a stand. If this planet is not habitable, we could as well, as a human race, kiss life as we know it goodbye. And what more than those who manage people who travel, who manage people that move around the planet and see for themselves and interact with communities. And that interaction is what we need to make it sustainable. We have the brain power. You know, God has given the human race incredible brain power. The knowledge to reverse a lot of the issues that are related to climate change is all here. We already have it. The challenge has been, how do we move forward in terms of policy? You know, if you look at the SDGs, there is one missing. And I'll tell you very clearly. SDG number 18 ought to have been clever governments. I know there are people of government here. I used to be one. Singapore demonstrated what clever government can do when it leads to meet a challenge. A little island, it has the third highest per capita income in the world. Why? Clever government. So, part of our conversation today is, and that's why we have an ambassador, how do we make governments clever? Okay? So that then we can make the earth sustainable. And so therefore, we are here today to say, we have the knowledge, we understand the problem, what we just need is the will to make it happen. The will to make it happen. So, I would like then to start with our clever government ambassador. Tell us about how did Costa Rica do it? How did they move from 17% to 60% forest cover?
Thank you very much for putting me on the spot. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of Magical Kenya Travel Expo and for giving me the opportunity of sharing Costa Rica's experiences, particularly over the past 50 years. So to answer your question about clever governments, I've been a diplomat for 20 years, and I'm also an economist, so I can relate to the whole Adam Smith mention. So I want to go back a little bit in time because I think that's very important to start from where we were back in the 70s, which is when we created our national park system, But at the same time, we had the Ministry of Agriculture pushing for more agriculture and livestock, and this led to our country having over 80% deforestation. 80% deforestation. When we realized the situation we were in, we decided we need to revert this trend and need to start promoting forest conservation. So back in 1997, 25 years ago, we were the first country to put a tax on carbon fuels, and with that we created the payment for environmental services. And that allowed us to finance keeping hundreds of thousands of families encouraged to keep the trees on their farms. And those that had already cut down the trees to actually plant more trees again. So that has allowed us to go from 80% deforestation to our current 52% forest coverage, of which 27% is national parks and reserves, but we also have 25% from private reserves, as in Kenya, which I really admire the work that is being done here. So our aim and our commitment, speaking about the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, is to achieve 60% forest coverage by the year 2030. So how does this tie into what we're here to talk about today, which is sustainability and inclusive tourism? So Costa Rica, and I remember because back in the 80s or 70s when I used to go camp on the beaches and there weren't that many hotels, basically the tourism sector started from very micro, small and medium households, families, and it has kept on. That has been the trend. So also in 1997, we created the Ministry of Tourism, which came up with this idea of the certification for sustainable tourism. So these are some examples, let's say more from the public policy, how it has helped to transform the eco-tourism country that Costa Rica has managed to position itself as right now. I think not only these public policies have been important in terms of creating the consciousness in the Costa Ricans of how important nature, biodiversity is. It's part of our DNA right now. Education has been a big part of it. Any child that you go see in Costa Rica, everybody is just, we adore our national parks, we adore our biodiversity, our ecosystems. But I think the important key about this conversation is when you decide what these public policies should be, it's not about the money. It's about education, it's about inclusion, it's about taking into account the well-being and better livelihoods of the local communities that live around these national parks, beaches, and attractions for tourists. And I think also, just to finalize, since there's quite a few panelists, I don't want to exceed my time, is the importance, and I think now it's incorporated in all the tourism sector and the Costa Ricans, is we need to think of sustainable tourism not only in terms of attracting the tourists that want that kind of ecotourism, which began with what we call soft tourism, which is just to see what you have in your country. This was like the 70s and the 80s. Then it was ecotourism, people that want to do things. And those people came in the 90s, at the beginning of the 2000s. Those are the ones that wanted to do the whitewater rafting, the canopy tours, the hiking the mountains, the going in the mangroves with the boats. And now the next level where we are is the people that want the sustainable tourism, which means live with the communities, get involved, see what they're doing. Because these communities are also the ones who have the small little hotels, are the ones who have the actual tourism industry very well organized. So I think that's to start. I just want to share those thoughts.
So thank you, Giovanni. I think you can now see the importance of clever government, okay? Which is you put in place the right policy, okay? And that policy then informs behavior, how the public react to it. Payment for ecosystem services, so there's a tax for it, a carbon tax, certification, which talks about rewards and punishments, So, and then educating the public. With that, then you can see. So probably, I would like to ask David, as a professor, are we researching in the right places to inform public policy? Are we teaching students in the right areas so that then they make the right decisions in the workplace? Tell us more.
Thank you very much, Kip, for the introductory part of it. And you asked me, are we teaching the right things? And now for us at Strathmore University, what happens in the surrounding is extremely important. And not just surrounding society per se. And our venture in terms of teaching research is actually informed by real issues in society. And like now, when we're talking about sustainability of tourism, I think Africa-wide, it's really a top priority. Because every African country is looking at tourism as an economic resource, right? But then for us at the school, we look at it, if tourism is a top income generating, if you look at the trend, we are looking at tourism 2050, before COVID, tourism was projected 2050 was going to be the top in terms of economic for African countries. And our projection is, how are we going to train? And one of the aspects that has been said by Giovanni is governance. We actually train in governance. Public policy is a big thing at the university, and it cuts across all sectors of economy. So that's one area that we're looking at strongly, and not just now, but into the future, governance. How do we create sustainable governance? That's important for us. Number two is about research. I mean, every university today, if we're not going to do research for this country and for Africa, we're going to close. And we do research that informs practice. We do research that will create impact. At the School of Tourism Hospitality, our struggle is how do we get partners, collaborators, funding, grants, to ensure that Mara is sustainable. I, David, and my team at the university, if I'm not able to give impact research for Mara, for Amboseli, for Laikipia, for the coastal region of Kenya, and all those destination hotspots that we are talking about across Kenya, then I would have failed. So that informs how we craft our research agenda for the country. Then if you talk about training, for example, we indulge into training that would inform business, entrepreneurship. Most of our young people are actually being trained to be job creators. One area we've seen very strong now in Kenya and beyond, in Africa-wide, is tourism innovation. So currently we are in the plan of setting up a tourism innovation hub that's going to build young people, and not just young people, including those who are in the practice who want to enhance their capacity in terms of tourism innovation. Then we are able to move it to the next direction, because at the university we are keen that tourism is really the next catch for Kenya and Africa, and we are setting up our frame, both teaching, research, and impact research along in the same direction.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think public policy is a product of research, and I'm glad that your university is looking at this seriously. I'm sure other universities in Kenya are doing the same, and the link with the industry. So Mohanjeet, you have had government, you have had a university. Now the practitioners, are you practicing these things? Are you alerting your customers? Are you reforming your practices in line of an existential threat to the planet?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kip. I think sometimes as private sector and communities, we're ahead of government. Nothing against researchers or government. But I think when it comes to sustainability, I think, for our audience, some may not know that the national parks and reserves in Kenya is only 8% of the landmass, which is extremely small. And 60 to 70% of the wildlife is outside that 8%. So you realize very quickly, unless those communities, that areas, the wildlife is protected. And Kip, the only way it will be protected if communities are involved and get benefits. And to me, there's no conservation without communities in East Africa. So I think what we have done as tourism, and now for almost 30 years, is realize that the key thing is habitat. And I think as bad, as terrible as COVID has been, the positive side of COVID, it has opened people's minds to realize how important biodiversity is, how important it is to protect our climate, our habitat. And we're seeing fires, floods in the Western world, when many times they've been kind of a bit resilient or not so affected by climate change, but it's having a massive impact. So I think, as we know, in Kenya, we have a big part of it, a large number of international travelers. So I think more and more now, even tourism businesses within Kenya and Africa that were not so focused on sustainability, realize that there's two things. One is the demand side. We are seeing more and more travelers now that want to come on a holiday, but they want to come to a holiday that's engaging in an authentic way with communities, is respecting them. It's not just about the money, it's about the respect, learning from them, and at the same time, coming to properties that have a low eco footprint and are making a positive difference. If we look at the community conservancy concept now, and our model that we did with Perennial Gamewatchers was for every room we set up, we have to protect 700 acres of habitat. So it's not about a conservancy fee, it's not about a profit from your operations. It's actually every room has to protect 700 acres. If I want to put up 10 rooms, I have to protect 7,000 acres of habitat. Protect the trees, the vegetation, and that's revenue to communities. And if we look at the community conservancies now, and I'm sure many of our agents here have been on to camps and properties within the conservancies at all different levels, from mid-range to high-end. We even have camping options. Now the community conservancies in Kenya is 12% of our landmass. And I think from a carbon perspective, we are seeing soil organic carbon being a massive driver of actually sequestering carbon. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you have committed yourself that you're head of government and research.
I'm challenging, so
we'll improve that.
Yes.
We'll definitely prove that shortly. Now, Elizabeth, you come from an activist background. Earlier on, when we were chatting, I asked you, I'm not hearing enough noise. Okay? Is there somebody that silenced your voice? Tell us.
No, nobody has silenced my voice. And I just want to add and say that we cannot talk about sustainability in tourism without talking about the climate crisis. And we cannot talk about sustainability in tourism without also talking about the interconnected triple planetary emergency that we are in. That's the climate crisis, the nature crisis, and the pollution crisis. I personally grew up in a small village in Nyeri County in Teto, and this is a county that has the highest forest cover in Kenya. And one thing I remember from my childhood was this stream that was flowing just close to my home, because apparently, according to my primary school books, it was the fastest flowing river in Africa. And according to how it was described, is that it used to carry logs and elephants. But today, we're not afraid to sit close to that stream because the water levels have gone down and it's no longer flowing in the same speed as it used to be. And also just recently, I visited northeastern part of Kenya where communities have been hit by the worst drought in history. And this is a drought that has seen 4 consecutive rainy seasons fail. And I saw decimated wildlife in the same place. So I think the big question we should be asking ourselves is, will the tourism industry survive from the climate crisis? And I think we need to look at it in two perspectives in terms of how the tourism industry is impacted by climate change and also how the tourism industry contributes to climate change, because it's also the same industry that contributes to about 8 to 11% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So we definitely have a contribution to make in terms of significantly reducing carbon footprints. And this has also to go beyond commitments. And I mentioned that we have had so many sessions where companies, big industries, and governments will commit to making certain steps to stop climate change, will commit to making certain steps to protect biodiversity, to protect communities, but it only goes beyond, it doesn't go beyond the commitments and the pledges. So we see a pattern of pledges being made and not met. And while we do this, climate change continues to impact the biggest industries in the world. And tourism is actually one of the biggest industries in the world today. So we are definitely part and parcel and should be part and parcel in addressing climate change. And I think we're not doing enough. And we need to challenge ourselves to do much more, because climate change is not going to be addressed by any one industry alone or any one country alone. It calls for us all around the world to come up together and make sure there's collective action, and also financing of biodiversity protection. People talk a lot about restoration, which is really great. I plant trees with kids every day, which is one of the reasons why I love also being in this space. But these trees that we are also planting, we have to remember that they are also impacted greatly by climate change. They are not going to survive on a 2.7 degrees warmer planet. So we need to go beyond and ensure that we are also protecting and conserving our existing biodiversity and ecosystems, because that is where the future is. The future is in protecting what we have right now for the sake of all generations to come.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm sure those of you in the tourism industry and other industries, related industries, Elizabeth is Generation Z, I think, or near Z, or near Y. This new generation think very differently. They are going to put everybody on this planet accountable. They have social media, and if you don't want to go viral, don't cross their path. Elizabeth, we look forward to you putting everybody accountable and putting pressure, because you live longest on this planet. If it is not sustainable, then your time on this planet will be limited. So thank you for that statement. And then the last speaker to speak by way of introduction is Julius. Julius, my namesake, is visually challenged. Do we include them? People with disabilities or any other inability, do we include them as we think of an inclusive tourism product, an inclusive planet? Because remember, it belongs to all of us. My namesake, do you feel we include you in this?
Yes, thank you very much. And it's a good question. And I normally tell people that persons with disabilities are part and parcel of the community. So we can't talk about sustainability without having to talk about inclusivity and accessible tourism. Persons with disabilities, we have varying numbers. 10%, WHO came up with another number, which is 15%. So it's rising and increasing in number. And when you talk about disabilities, it's not the kind of disability that you can only perceive, but we're also having invisible disabilities. Normally when I walk into a room, no one will tell that I have a visual disability until I stand up and I start walking out with my white cane and I shock them. So when we talk about sustainable tourism, we want to bring on board everyone, because we move as a people, and you can't move by leaving others behind, and then at the end of the tunnel, you start making bridges to actually accommodate for this kind of community, because persons with disabilities, we have varying needs, and putting a ramp won't take care of that person who's deaf. It won't take care of that person who has autism or epilepsy. So we need to look at it from a wider spectrum, and also understand the community at large, because when you think about disability, we are in a very dominant culture, and it's what has been passed down through generations that has fueled stigma in the society and made it look like persons with disabilities are a charity case. So when you're going to plant the trees, you actually leave behind people who are blind, people who have physical disability, because you feel like they won't contribute or they won't have a voice to actually make a change. But think of it as this way. Persons with disabilities have the same financial capabilities that you have. We are walking away from that mentality of thinking, oh, he's blind, we need to take care of him. How about I also take care of you? I can also take care of the environment the way you do. And when we talk about sustainability, I'll give you a good example, like the electric vehicles, having them in the game parks. They are for also sustainable reasons, but also they benefit persons with disabilities, like that blind person will actually immerse more into the environment and get to understand the environment better by having a silent vehicle, without the internal combustion engines. They'll actually get to hear the animals, get to hear them, plow the grass from the ground and get to hear them walk around. That is a sort of, I don't have to see for me to enjoy nature, I don't have to see for me to go to a very spectacular destination. For me being there, I also feel the ambience. I also feel the serenity of the place. Last weekend, we took 30 blind students to Giraffe Center and Museum for them to experience. And I'm talking from a point of us preserving what we have to a point that we can actually, and I like what Elizabeth has talked about, to the next generation, because we got them into this room where they could feel the fossils and actually get to interact with the animals. Just guess on that experience that a blind person is getting to interact with an animal for the first time. It actually makes you get out of yourself and get to think of the other person. And when we make tourism inclusive and accessible, it's not only for the benefit of persons with disabilities, but for us all, because you'll get to enjoy it more when you remove the barriers, when you eliminate those limitations that actually hinder persons with disabilities to enjoy and to be part of the tourism that you're talking about. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Julius. I think I want just to use his words. The art is for us all, for all of us, not just for those who exhibit a certain ability. It is for everybody. And that's a very clear message. I would like now to just go around with one simple question. How do we reduce our carbon footprint? And just say it from your perspective, academic, practical, government, activist, how do we reduce our carbon footprint? Because we talk about sequestration and everything, but in practical terms, the industry is here. In practical terms, what would you like to see? Let's begin with Ambassador.
Okay, so this is my favorite topic in life. I've been involved in climate change for over 12 years, and like Elizabeth, I was an activist, so this very much motivates me. So again, I'm going to make the reference to government because I think it's important that we have the framework to do things, and I couldn't agree more with you that in many, or the majority of the cases, it is the local communities and the sector and the private sector and civil society, the ones who actually make the change. But for example, in Costa Rica, we launched the National Plan for Decarbonization 2018-2050. Usually our policies are for 10 years, sometimes 20, but you know how governments are. When they come in, they want to change everything and come up with new ideas. But we've learned that medium-term strategies do make a difference. And the important thing about this national plan is it took us 3 years to sit down with all of the different sectors. Industry, transportation, agriculture, because you probably know, methane emissions from livestock, from fertilizers and for the coffee sector, for example, et cetera, et cetera. We need to have them on board. Otherwise, how can we say we're going to become a carbon neutral country by 2050? So this was a very intensive work, bottom to top, because if we didn't have their commitment, this is not going to happen. So the tourism sector was one of the strongest one and one of the most organized sectors. And I think they are making very big efforts, not only with what I mentioned before of the certification for sustainable trade, but what you were mentioning, what I thought was absolutely extraordinary, of the 700 hectares per room or tent that you have. We're a very small country, 52,000 square kilometers versus Kenya, that's like 12 times bigger. But the point is, there are efforts made and commitments from the different sectors. But before I just change, I think it's very important, also linked to what the professor said, and that has to do with science, and I say it because, for example, the tourism sector in the coastal parts of Costa Rica is now working very closely with NGOs that have the science and the knowledge to be able to say, mangroves. Mangroves are something extraordinary. They capture 4 times as much CO2 as forests do. And yet we have eliminated about 70% of mangroves around the world, and they are only in the tropical areas of the planet. So in Costa Rica, we're trying to do this, and I went to visit Kilipi Creek, Wathuti Creek, and I saw what they're doing. They're incredible things. So I think that there are a lot of things that can be done when you think in terms of the sectorial tourism. And I think there's so many incredible initiatives around the globe. What I think is the problem is not making this information accessible to everybody and have a better sharing of experiences of these incredible.
Just as an additional question, Ambassador, adaptation, because you are telling people move from this lifestyle to this lifestyle. How are we going to manage that transition? It's expensive because you're changing lifestyles.
It depends. I was the national coordinator for the livestock strategy to reduce green gas house emissions. And I was a national coordinator for the coffee sector, which we had all of the cooperatives in the country be part of this. And the pineapple sector. This parentheses, I worked for the Ministry of Agriculture for 4 years, so that's why I know that sector very well. But you wouldn't believe it, but there are a lot of adaptation measurements that are not that costly, you know? Perhaps the mitigation ones are more. And that's when you require subsidies or monies or donations or money that comes from the UNFCCC convention. But there are a lot of things that can be done, and I think especially with, for example, the increase of sea level rise in Costa Rica on the coastlines. It's already, for example, the mangroves, it's a win-win situation. On the one hand, they are capturing more CO2, and on the other hand, they're also, if you plant them more, they're going to be able to help the increase of the sea level and the salinification of the water. So there are a lot of different actions that I think really are win-win situations.
So the tourism industry is listening to you and saying, you have talked about mangroves a lot, and in Kenya, we are strong in that. And a lot of the mangroves were lost in Kenya because it's hardwood, so it moves faster. So it's something probably the tourism industry can look at. And that's why, Mohanjeet, I'm turning to you. What can we do to prevent this disaster?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm definitely in agreement that we need good government and we need policies, and also we need good research coming out of universities. It's all of us working together. I think when I think of carbon, obviously we know that the importance of moving to solar, your waste and all that. As a company in camp, we've been 100% solar for 28 years now. But I think we need to go way beyond that. And coming back to what I was saying, to me, in Kenya and East Africa, the conservation and actually the improving and keeping carbon from going into the atmosphere is about communities. And I think we know we have a strong economy. So to me, the key thing is how can we get more money into communities from tourism? And what we are doing is we're working using satellite to measure soil organic carbon in the existing conservancies we have. We can see in the Masai Mara, in the conservancies, which is bigger than the park now, there's about $5 million going from tourism to the communities, many of them individually to their bank accounts. So not through an elected committee that is stealing 90% of it, but the person's cows who's being eaten by the lion is actually getting a direct benefit from it. But it's not enough. Unfortunately, conservation, tourism, and protecting biodiversity doesn't pay very much. So I think we have to align ourselves to the Paris climate change talks and all these companies' commitments to net zero. And what we are seeing now is companies like Microsoft, Salesforce, they're looking at what is beyond carbon. And it's biodiversity, it's ecosystem health. So in the Mara key conservancies, we've measured the soil organic carbon, but we're using satellite. You can measure 30 centimeters down using satellite, and it's sequestered 1.1 to 1.4 tons of carbon per acre per year since 2018. We look at electric vehicles, and I'm not against them, but an electric vehicle might save you 5 to 7 tons of carbon a year. you lease and protect 6 or 7 acres in the Mbura ecosystem and you manage it, so it's sequestering carbon, that's an electric vehicle. So I think the key thing that I see, and that is more revenue to landowners. So not on top of tourism, it's layering that. And as tourism, we're working now with Harvard University to try and develop a biodiversity credit as kind of a future thing. So I think there's a lot, Kip, that we can do.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you have introduced another word to this conversation here, which is ecosystem health. It's the health of the entire ecosystem, not just reducing carbon per se, but looking at the health of the entire ecosystem, which then brings in the issue of biodiversity. Okay, thank you very much. I think we're beginning to get the hang of it. Prof.
Kip, I was getting extremely excited. Yeah, because I'm a biodiversity scientist.
Yes.
And when I heard the talks, first of all, I was extremely touched when Julius said he does not have to hear it to enjoy it. I just picked that. He doesn't have to see it to enjoy it. He would actually hear it. And that would be his enjoyment. I think those are really fantastic statements. And Mohanjeet, you said it. The soil are better sequesters of carbon than even trees anyway, if you didn't know. So if you had really super well taken care of soils, you're actually taking more carbon than the tree. And probably that's not known to many. So we need to start getting a lot more interested also in the quality of our soils. But then something, Kip, when we are talking about climate change and tourism, I think it starts with leadership. I mean, tell me in the room, any tour operator today, any conservancy today where the leader is not pro carbon sequestration, climate leadership, you're going nowhere. So I think it starts from leadership. Even countries where presidents are really pro climate change, they have really done super and exciting strides. And I think it starts from the room now. If we are going to talk about climate change and tourism, go home and think about your design. I think it's about design thinking of your business. It's about the model of the business. If we are to check at the model of the business, can we see the strengths of climate change mitigation and adaptation, how your tourism business is going about that? So for us at the university, we are looking at climate change mitigation from a business model. That's number one. Number two, when you're talking about limiting or reducing climate impact from the tourism perspective, I think guys, we have to be conscious about transport. That's important. I mean, everyone knows from statistics and research that transport costs over 72% of carbon. Hotels only 24%. But out of the 72%, over 50+% is from aviation. So what does it mean? Even if we change all our 12 vans electric today, take this statement, and all our aviation and airlines are still not compliant, we are only as below par. So what does it mean? We have to run them ago. If we have the flights to the Mbura are not compliant in terms of climate mitigation and carbon, and we have all the vehicles to the Mbura, all electric, you can be sure we are still performing at some level or below that. But it's a good trend moving forward, and it's good to do that. For us at the university, we are thinking of how do we mainstream green energy into this. And we have our own green energy, green energy research center. It's doing this and has done this across many parts of communities in other ways. And there's this carbon calculator that was just developed recently. Being conscious in terms of your carbon footprint, we are telling that to travelers. Through conservation education, how do you mainstream that again in your tourism business? I mean, we must talk climate change every other time. Do we have the guides that really know about it? And what do they tell the tourists about it anyway? So I think for me, I look at it from a conservation education perspective, how we mainstream that in our business model. I look at it from the leadership perspective, is the leader talking it? And what capacity do you have in your team to really mitigate and adapt to your tourism to climate change? Otherwise, the carbon conscious standards should be a thing of everyone, but it starts with a business model from the word go. I think that's how I probably look at it now.
Thank you. So, David is talking about leadership. A lot of you here are the owners of your business or key managers in that business. What are you doing? But remember, leadership begins with quantifying the problem. How many of you have actually measured your carbon footprint? Measurement helps you to respond. So probably one of the take homes from this meeting from Professor is measure so that you can adapt and mitigate. You could actually be focusing on a very small thing, okay? Yet the bigger culprit is somewhere else. Where I work, we did measure, and we found that 97% of our problem is in our investments, which we had no control over, because it's a long-term investment. Yet, internally, people are talking about, remove plastics for drinking water. We found that that was just 0.1%. Thank you very much, Prof. Elizabeth, I'm looking at you. Can you talk to your people? Carbon footprint.
Yeah, we've had very practical solutions from my fellow panelists. I just want us to be genuine in actions on climate, because the question is about why do we want to take action on climate? Is it because we care about our children and the fact that they need food, they need water? Is it because we care about our planet? Or is it because we want to look good? You know, there are two sides in terms of taking action on climate. So I believe there is so much that we can do, especially if we get back to the point that we humans are nature. And if we imagine ourselves as nature and the fact that we visit places because we love the places. And I always say that you protect what you love. The reason I got into conservation myself is because I remember that experience of growing up close to the trees and seeing clean streams, of which today they're no longer in the same state. But developing that love for nature, for the environment is what connects us, brings us together as humans, and what reminds us why we need to protect nature. So if we can be deliberate and decide to make drastic steps to take action on climate because we love the planet, we love the people, and we choose to put them above profits, then I think that is going to be genuine and real climate action. And there is so much that we can do, and this is beyond also individual responsibility. It's also about the systems, it's also about the policies that we have in place. So when we talk about climate action, we talk about it in two ways. There's individual responsibility and also the systems around us. We have so much of policies, but we're not implementing any of this, or if any, it's just a little of it that is being implemented. So we have to be very deliberate about climate action, especially because it's urgent, it's happening now, and we cannot wait for another year or another month to begin taking action. There is no time for us to say or plan about what we will do. We have to begin doing it right now. And to begin with, if we check about the systems, I think one of the immediate things that governments need to do is to stop subsidizing the destruction of nature, because nature is the same place we visit, it's the same place that is also where we meet together in the same place that is helping also this tourism industry thrive. And if we cannot let nature thrive, then I don't think the industry will thrive as well. And also when it comes to issues on finance, nature is not receiving the finance that it needs at the moment. And we are not reinventing a new wheel when it comes to climate and nature solutions. I have visited communities that live close by places where is a tourist attraction center, and these communities are leading initiatives. These communities are helping breed octopuses, they are helping protect the coral reefs. These communities in many instances are the communities that we need to support and work closely with to make sure that their initiatives are scaled up and that they are able to do much more. And we also need to use our spaces as these places where we can actually raise awareness on the environment, that it's not just visiting, but this is a place where we remind people that they need to do much more for the planet, they need to do much more for the environment. And I think the other last thing is leading by example, and that's for the tourist companies and governments as well. And I love every time I visit Karura Forest and I find people being asked, there's that sign that says, you cannot come in here with plastic bottles. So I think leading by examples from events, even events as these, working with companies that do not actually accelerate the issue of plastic pollution, I think it would be really great if we work with the right people, work with the communities, and make sure that we are not just committing to doing things, but we're actually taking action and doing what we said we're going to do.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Remember, Elizabeth addressed COP26. The next COP is in Egypt, COP27, and she will be there. So, very strong advocate. But probably just a clarification, Elizabeth. The greatest competitor to nature tourism, nature biodiversity, is agriculture. How do we balance the two? Because that's really, because you have now to look at livelihoods, lives, and then we want to protect nature. How do we balance the two?
I think we need to remind ourselves, for instance, just back here at home, if we look at our forest cover and the fact that the reason, the issue of food insecurity is actually exacerbated by the climate crisis in a huge way. So if we say that we're giving up our forest lands, for example, for people to farm, then there's going to be no food enough for us in any case. And I give an example of how I grew up, and I know many people will relate to this, that the granaries back then were full of harvests, full of cassavas, full of maize, full of arrowroots. But today, there's not even enough to store, let alone sell or even eat at that time. So these are patterns that we need to remind ourselves of what is actually important, what is possible, what do we need to be prioritizing at the moment. Is it continuing to destroy nature, continuing to destroy the habitats for wildlife, continuing to destroy our forests at the expense of the fact that that is actually accelerating the same problems that we are facing today? I think it's important that we ensure that we reach that balance, but remember that we cannot sacrifice our ecosystems and nature for anything, because that is just going to be a short-term, short-sighted solution that is going to bring much more challenges in the future that we cannot even handle.
Thank you.
Yes.
Same question. How do we reduce our carbon footprint?
I think I'll pick it from Elizabeth when she says that we are short-sighted. We are all blind in our own ways. I'll tell you why. If you don't take those measures, the small things that you actually take for granted matter a lot, because if you start preaching out of what you're doing and you forget that it needs to start with you, it needs to, if you don't love what you're doing, then you'll actually implement at the least what you can actually brag about. I've done this and that, but in the long run, you don't have actually a solution for the next. And I like what Ambassador said. They have a policy 2018, 2050. What are we talking about? We are talking about the bigger picture. We're talking about the future of our biodiversity. We're talking about the future of our tourism. And I think we need to walk away from looking at tourism as a business and start appreciating tourism as, being part of what entails tourism. Because if you start marketing a place because of the beautiful, sceneries and all that, you actually forget that the reason why you are actually marketing that place is because of what is in store for people to come and see. So then you don't take care of the environment. You actually go all out to actually make it, branding and marketing. You pour so much money into research and all that, but you forget that you need to start with taking care of that environment, bringing in species that will actually continue to, sustain the ecosystem of that place, to actually have it thrive beyond that 1 year or 2 years. Because you don't have to, even if you've leased that place. And I look at conservancies and actually hurt a lot, because they get into 10 acres, 50 acres, they actually move out all the indigenous people there. They want to preserve, but also to market the place without having to look at what we have here. What can we do to improve what we have and preserve? That is the whole essence of conservation. We don't need to go outside of what we have. Let's work with what we have first before we get to that point of looking back and actually improving on what we have. And I tell people, we move as one people, because I know you're actually not aware that the policies that have been put in place, they are enough to make us move for the next 100, 200 years without having to invent or innovate or come up with new strategies for conservation and preservation. So if we start from that point where you start as being an active participant in conserving the environment, then it goes beyond you and it trickles down, and you actually liberate people around you to start looking at it from a wider picture.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like now to invite questions from the audience. Any questions for our participants? Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for the panelists to give us.
Give him the mic. Other than the cameraman can record.
Well, thank you to all the panelists for this very interesting insight into sustainability for the tourism industry. Now, I would like to point out something about some of the things that have been said there. Particularly interesting has been the speech from the ambassador of Costa Rica. She pointed out the importance of the mangrove for protection of the coast. And it's something that touched me very much, because I'm coming from Kipng'etich, from the coast in Kenya. And we are seeing how delicate is the ecosystem there, and especially how interconnected it is with the reality of poor community. Now, on the other side, some other panelists talk about big companies that are coming now in Africa, putting a lot of money, investment in big projects that actually can target in some way sustainability. What happened in our point of view, we are actually designer, and we are designing objects and furniture using natural and sustainable material and trying to help the local community. What we perceive is that all these investment coming from USA especially, they are all targeting this big project, massive project that can give back immediate or not immediate big revenue. But this is excluding automatically all this poor community, which are actually the ones that are affecting the most the environment. Because how can you ask a poor community in the coast, for example, not to cut the mangrove and use it as a hardwood for their own use, or actually to sell to people that use it for building or manufacturing of artifacts, when actually this is one of the few ways that they have to put money in their pocket. So why we don't actually try to divert some of this big investment into helping directly the local communities? Because I understand that from the point of view of an investor, he's looking for the biggest chance to get money back. But this is not always the way to tackle actually the problem of the environment. Why don't we try to convince these big names to actually go and see how the poor community lives, which are actually probably 80% of the population in Africa. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so just keep that thought. Any other comment from the audience? Has the panel shocked you enough to action? Yes, madam.
Just a quick
Yeah.
one.
Just give her the mic.
Just a quick question with regards to flights. Everyone, well, says stay at home, don't fly, staycations, etc. But from an African perspective, obviously getting international visitors here makes a huge difference to local communities and travel. How would you suggest that gets dealt with?
Okay. That's a quick one. Any other? Okay. Back to the panel. Ambassador.
Well, the comment about the mangroves and the big hotels, I can only speak from my country's experience, but since the 80s and 90s, we focused on small and medium hotels. So frankly, we have very, very few, I think perhaps only 2 or 3 all-inclusive hotels, and maybe only 3 or 4 big ones, like the Four Seasons. Because of our idiosyncrasy, because it grew that way, since the 80s. But again, then we go back to the policies and what each country decides. It's their priority of what is called foreign inversión extranjera directa, foreign investment, forced direct investment. So that's almost a public policy issue and what kind of investments you want to attract. But I do want to say something about what you mentioned about the mangroves, because I think we're kind of getting into the deeper issues, and it's almost the ethical issues. For example, in Costa Rica, we're so proud about our national parks and our marine absolute reserves. So these incredible marine reserves, you have local communities. I lived there for 5 years. I know the people. And they are not allowed to fish because it's an absolute reserve. And so then you say, who's right? Do we protect going back to Elizabeth's reflection, what's more important? To protect the nature and conservation, or what you mentioned, Julius? Or is it more important to think about food security for the local communities? I don't have an answer. I'm just throwing that idea out there to think about this as well. And about Tessa's question about transportation, I personally have my own moral and ethical guilt every time I fly, because I feel like my carbon footprint, on me it weighs, morally weighs, but I have a farm that I've planted a lot of trees, so I feel like somehow I'm offsetting that. But I agree, if we can do electric cars, if we can do, from carpooling to, forgetting this thing of let's rent a car and 2 people drive in a car, or, I don't see any other way out, except, or paying to offset getting your carbon credits. But that's a very deep question as well that I don't think we have an answer for that yet.
So can we say that the tourism industry will, I don't know how many kilos of carbon a tree absorbs, so that then we say if they have traveled from wherever they have traveled, we can measure their footprint, and then we force them to grow trees as a mitigation. Yeah? So, David, you want to say, make it quick.
Yeah, Kip, this is extremely interesting, but in terms of carbon, very practical ideas. In some countries, people must appreciate what is called low-impact transport, sustainable transport. Now, in Africa is where you find everybody's grappling with driving cars and everybody's owning that number of cars. But we forget that public transport is a model of actually short-circuiting the amount of carbon from each and every one of us. So if you move to a country and you are starting to see public policy on public transport, then it means we are thinking right. But as you say, it should be expensive to actually, your transport should be expensive if you are dispensing more of the carbon. But you see, this is where we run with murder in Africa. So the people pay, the polluter pay principle hasn't come home. So I think we are going to see more tax around carbon impact. For mangroves, nobody's greater than the livelihoods of the local people. And I think we need to take that as a right in our pocket. We should promote more low-impact projects. And if the people realize that it's taking away the livelihoods of people without alternatives, greater projects give alternatives first. Because people have to live for tomorrow, today and tomorrow. So if your project is going to be there for long, what alternative have you put for people? I think the government policy has failed us here. And I think moving forward, then we need to also hold to account such projects. Lastly, Kip, if you allow, let's appreciate low-impact tourism. Walking safaris, trekking safaris. You get what I mean? We don't have to drive to enjoy. But I think the next generation type of products are going to be low-impact products. I don't have to sleep in a luxury hotel to enjoy. So we are going to see more of this type of products moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So we now want to conclude and give each panelist a minute each to make their conclusions. Let's begin with my namesake, Julius.
Thank you very much. I want to just leave everyone with a thought on accessible and inclusive tourism. As much as we are talking about sustainability, conservation, preservation, we need to also embrace the fact that we have persons with disabilities in the community. We can't put that aside, and they need to live their life. I strive to live a heart-centered life, and I also live to the fullest. The other day I went on a game drive to Masai Mara, and I actually shocked everyone I was with in the car. It got to a point I told the driver, kill the engine. Why? Because I need to hear those elephants. I don't need you to describe what they're doing. I want to hear the ruffles and the chaotic nature they live in. So we need to understand that. And also, if you have a person with a disability at home, take the advantage that the government has made public recreation centers to be free for persons with disabilities to enjoy. You can go to the national park, don't pay a dime. You can go to all these beautiful places, and you actually get to enjoy with that person and get to explain more and get to absorb all that. And also for persons who are creating big projects and all that, just think of involving persons with disabilities, because you need that voice to actually make tourism accessible, not only to them, but you're actually making it accessible to everyone across the board. And if you use that model and actually make it an action item that persons with disabilities, you don't think of them as the afterthought. They're actually there from the onset. You actually make an impact. Just think of having someone to showcase your product in a different way, from a different dimension, and then how that will be taken and shifting the perception of the society, because we need to empower persons with disabilities and make sure that the society understands that disability is not a limitation.
Thank you. Powerful. Okay, Elizabeth, final thoughts, especially when you are going to COP27.
I think my final thought is an assignment or an ask to the travel and tourism industry to join in the climate crisis response and join in a way that we go all in for the planet and the people. And this is in terms of the investment choices we're making. Where are we putting our money? Is it in places that are protecting nature, in places that we are also safeguarding the rights of our communities, indigenous people as well at the same time, and also in terms of the policies that we put in place, and these must be policies that we actually implement. We are in a climate emergency at the moment, and unless every sector joins in to also decarbonize, every sector joins in to make the right choices, to make the right investments into nature protection, into making sure that we leave this planet habitable and livable even for the next generations, then we cannot say that we are doing something for the climate and for the planet. So we have to make the right choices and begin to do it right now, because the more we delay the action, the more our communities and people that are on the front end of this crisis are being greatly impacted. Every person can contribute, and also we can use the power, the influence, and the resources that we have within ourselves to educate the masses. Every person that actually also visits the places that we are talking about, we can influence this through the policies, investments, and every decision that we choose to make today, but it has to start now.
Thank you very much. Prof.
Kip, I'm extremely humble today. And Julius made me a very humble man going back home. And he said the model is tourism for all of us. We never thought so lightly, but the truth is, one lady, Immaculate Karuru, my student, I celebrate her today because she recently was trying a startup for autistic people. Fantastic student, thinking through beyond to the left out people. So I think for me, Kip, inclusivity is the next way to go in terms of modeling tourism. And one big question, it's tourism for who? I think we really have to define that, because until you realize that tourism is not only for the business person, then you're gonna get the model in a wrong way. So the tourism for who is one big question that we have to think through all the times. Thank you.
Mohanjeet?
Yeah, thank you. I think in closing, I would just kind of along the lines of what Elizabeth was saying, I think each of us can make a difference. Many times we think it's too big, the emissions is too high, I can't make a difference. And I think I challenge each of us to make a difference. Also, many times, many of us are living comfortable lives, we don't see the impact. But what about your children? My daughter is 9, my son is 12. There are 5 generations for us in Kenya. I want, when they grow up, what kind of world are they going to have? Sometimes I ask myself that. And I think it gives me a lot of hope seeing young people like Julius and Elizabeth here. These are people driving the change, and that gives me a lot of hope. And in closing, I just want to say, Julius has also challenged me. I think many times thinking about people with disabilities, I'm sometimes fearful or I don't want to offend them. But I think you challenged me, Julius, so I'm taking it on board. And I think inclusivity is the key. It doesn't matter about what it is. And I think that is where communities come in. Many times as businesses, we exclude them. And I think we can make a difference. So let's definitely do that.
Thank you. And Balazi?
Thank you so much. I guess for me, again, also this has been really a magnificent panel, and to share with all of you, very enriching. And I cannot but say, act locally and think globally. I mean, it's the only way forward, or walk the talk. But since I'm also, my hat is as ambassador of Costa Rica, but I'm also the permanent representative of Costa Rica in the United Nations Environmental Program and UN Habitat. What I want to say is within UNEP, which I think a lot of Kenyans or even Africans or even people from the whole world don't even know that it's here, and it's very important because it's the only organization of United Nations that is in what we call the Global South. The rest of them are in New York, Vienna, Rome, what am I missing? Geneva for human rights. So this is the only one we have in the planet, and it's about environment, and it's very important. And we negotiate things, resolutions like we did last February, were the same as the Paris Agreement has been so important in the past 7 years of saying, okay, 193 countries commit to reduce their emissions, thinking about the planet, thinking about the next generations. So UNEP has also played and plays a very important role. And one of the resolutions that came out is called the fight against plastics in its entire life cycle. And it's very important. And it's going to be a very, very difficult topic in the next 2 years, because you can imagine the industry of plastics, what that means. And it relates to what a few of you have talked about, plastic bottles, etc. I'm not going to go down that path. But what I want to say is, within UNEP, there's a program, and I'm the co-chair of this program, and it's called the 10-Year Framework for Sustainable Consumption and Production. And basically it includes sustainable tourism, sustainable construction, lifestyles, citizens' lifestyles, education, circular economy, textiles, and electronics, just to name a few. But my point is, in summary, the change must be made with that vision of we all, like you said, Julius, we all have a part to play, and if we think when we consume that we must be sustainable, it will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's give a round of applause to our audience, to our panelists. So I'll try to just give you a snapshot of what are the take-home messages from our audience. Number one is clever public policy. I think that has come out clearly. Costa Rica, if you go and read about it, it is a product of very clever public policy. And governments need to go in the front line of clever public policy. You also heard from Professor, research. Research informs public policy. So our universities, our colleges must then do more research to inform public policy and the evolution of it, okay? So that then when there are conferences like COP27 coming, what are we saying, say from Kenya, the hosts of UNEP, and the hosts of incredible biodiversity, what are we saying to the world? What are we doing? And then, of course, Mohanjeet talked about a responsible tourism industry, which is inclusive, which is sustainable, which is aware of its footprint, and so therefore build a business model that guarantees that sustainability. And I think most of you will go back to the drawing board and rejig your business models so that then they are sustainable for the future. Because, as Elizabeth said, the next generation will not be like us, our generation. They are more discerning about sustainability. They will live longer than us, and so therefore they will have the full impact of climate change. And so therefore, their consumption patterns will be very different. They will punish those businesses which have not adapted and mitigated their carbon footprint. In fact, I see them as the generation that will require that you display your certificate of your carbon footprint before they patronize your business. So those changing consumption patterns, and because of also the evolving nature of media, they'll be very powerful. People like Elizabeth and Julius will be very powerful advocates. And if, for example, they say, we are not going to your camp, you could as well close that day. They are going to be very, very powerful. And I think Julius summed it well at the end and said, the earth belongs to all of us. It doesn't matter who you are, what color, it doesn't matter what ability, it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what species, it belongs to all of us. I think that's a very fitting ending from Julius. Thank you very much, everybody. And a round of applause. Asante sana. Thank you.